cineinc.com.
Well, this is her, an English woman who really was Indian. She took an Indian passport, she married an Indian, she dressed in Indian style even before she set foot on Indian soil. So she was born in 1911 in Derby in the English Midlands, not from a privileged background. She got to Oxford, and there in the early 1930s she met and fell in love with a fellow student, a Punjabi guy, Baba Pyarelal Bedi. They were both left-wingers, they were both nationalists, and it was an insurgent romance which, of course, broke with social convention. They married, and then they spent a year in Berlin, of all places, where Hitler was coming to power, and then she made her life in India. And they went to Lahore, settled there. She started working both teaching English and as a journalist. That was her main career as a journalist. And they became part of a rather gilded set of bohemian left-wing intellectuals, which included quite a few European and American women. She arrives in India in 1934, just as the Communist Party has been declared illegal, and as the temper of the nationalist movement after the failure of the Round Table conferences is gathering. So it was a period of activism and militancy, but also of suppression. If you were a member of the Communist Party, that was a problem. And she got involved in the new civil rights movement, which Nehru led. Her husband got very much involved in the Kisan movement, Kisan Sabha, and they were both very active in bringing out both a rather highbrow quarterly review and then a distinctly lowbrow and activist weekly political newspaper in Lahore. So they were really very active. Her husband was repeatedly arrested as a communist activist. When war broke out, he tried to disrupt military recruitment in Punjab, and that was a big issue for the British authorities. So he was basically interned. He spent 15 months locked up in a camp in Rajasthan in the desert. She was outraged by this. She said he's been jailed for opposing fascism and opposing imperialism. I oppose fascism, I oppose imperialism. And she persuaded Gandhi to let her become a satyagrahi, so one of the people who courted arrest. So she said she was going to repudiate the emergency wartime regulations and deliberately flout them. And just saying that she would do that was sufficient for her to be arrested. And she spent 3 months in 1941 in Lahore female jail. Well, Kabir was born in Lahore in early 1946, and of all her 3 children, well, there was a 4th who died very young. He was the one that was closest to her. When Freda became attracted to Buddhism, Kabir would go as a child to Burma with her, and at one stage became a novice monk for several months, shaved his head, wore the robes, went out seeking alms. And even later in life, after Freda died, she died in 1977, Kabir spent 12 years living in California, and he was active in New Age style religions and movements. I don't think he would describe himself as a Buddhist, but he would say that his spirituality is really an important part of his life and has largely been shaped by his parents and his mother in particular.
I first heard about it in 1981 from her attendant, Pema Zangmo, a Tibetan woman who was with her when she died in 1977. So it was 4 years later. I was at Sharabling Monastery in Himachal Pradesh building a retreat house, and Pema Zangmo was building a nun's retreat, and for some reason, she came over to me all the time and told me about the passing of Mamila, whom she called Divine Mother or Holy Mother. And I listened to this story, and it was something I'd never heard before, that she had not shown any signs of a normal death, like her body didn't decay. she elaborated even more. She said there were lights, there were rainbows, there was. She made it rather glamorous in a way, and full of miraculous signs. And she was convinced that Mummy had passed into nirvana, into an enlightened state. So I kept this in my mind. She was in room 146 at the Oberoi Hotel in Delhi, a room that was always available to her thanks to her good friend Goody Oberoi, who was the wife of the hotel owner. It was the evening before the Buddhist conference was due to happen, and she went into meditation as she usually did in the evening, and when her attendant heard a cough, a sound from the room, she came into the room and she found that Freda was sitting in meditation, but she had passed away. She was gone. So then some doctors came and took blessing from her. Indian doctors took blessing from her. They moved the body the next morning to their cousin's house in Nizamuddin, and she was lying down, and there was ice packed around the body. It was March in Delhi, it was very hot, and there was still no sign of a normal, like a rotting situation or anything like that. So 4 days later, she was cremated at Goody Oberoi's farmhouse in Delhi, and many monks and I think Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, went to see the body while it was at the cousin's house in Nizamuddin. Ayang Rinpoche is a Lama who is well known in Tibetan Buddhist circles for teaching mainly the POA, which is consciousness transference. So it's a very esoteric practice, which I don't really want to describe, but if you are adept at doing this practice and you have gained a level of realization in your lifetime, in other words, that you have already experienced the clear light state of the mind, then when you die, you are able to recognize that same clear light state immediately after death, and the two merge, and you become enlightened. Well, you know, she wasn't given her full dues in her lifetime, but she never sought publicity or credit for anything that she did. She was only concerned with helping others and serving her guru, the 16th Karmapa. So it was the days way before, social media and so on. So she got in the circles that she was involved in, she was very highly considered. In fact, several great lamas have told me that she had already reached an advanced stage of meditation. So I would say that she was quiet. It was a quiet recognition of her ability.
Well, I think it's true that she had a good death. She died during an international Buddhist gathering in Delhi, which meant when she was cremated, there were Buddhist monks from many different countries who were present and chanting at the cremation. All the stories about her body remaining supple. There's some stories about rainbows appearing at her cremation. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a person of faith, to be honest. I respect faith, but I don't have a personal faith. I found these quite difficult, but the way I look at it is the people who tell these stories believe them. Do I believe that the rainbows appeared? I don't think it really matters. The people who tell them believe them, and they see those stories as a sign of great spirituality, holiness and reverence. And I would see them in that way. So I don't, whether there were rainbows or not, the fact that people say there were rainbows is seen as conferring on Freda a really high spiritual renown and value. She was a columnist for a daily Indian paper on women's issues for a women's audience decades before this became commonplace. She was an Englishwoman who embraced Indian nationalism and went to jail for opposing a country which happened to be her mother country. She embraced not simply Tibetan Buddhism, but became a Tibetan Buddhist nun and was really very important in helping Tibetan Buddhists adapt to exile in India and the West. All those are really quite remarkable achievements, but I think it's the sum of her life that interests me more than any particular aspect, and the way that she reinvented herself without repudiating any aspect of her past. So even when she was a Tibetan Buddhist nun, when she came to London, she had lunch with her old friend Barbara Castle, then a Labour cabinet minister, at the Houses of Parliament and marched in there with her head shaved and her Buddhist maroon robes, turning heads, but quite oblivious to the fact that she was making that impact.
cineinc.com